Hi, everybody, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
I'm Chris Gorski.
And today we have an all-English lesson for you to start off the month of May. Today is May 1st. It's May Day and not Mayday, Mayday. By the way, do you know what Mayday means?
No, actually, tell me.
It's actually from French. It's m'aider. And me is me and aider is aid. It means help me, help me. So that's why ships will send out a message saying, Mayday, Mayday. It's m'aider in French. Help me, help me.
Interesting. It makes sense because the French were some of the early pioneers of aviation, right? So that they would define the kind of terms of flying makes sense too.
But I'm thinking of nautical terms. They used it for ships, right? Our ship is in trouble. Mayday, Mayday.
We could also use this in an airplane, right?
Absolutely.
So there we go. So I'm jumping right to the skies.
to the modern times. Okay, we're on page 6 in your magazines. Our title today is The Lasting Gift of Grandma Moses.
I am in love with the art of Grandma Moses. It's a style we can call Americana, and my mom was a big fan of it. So when I look at it, I get a lot of warm and fuzzy feelings looking at Grandma Moses' really colorful and happy paintings.
It's kind of hard not to have warm and fuzzy feelings when you're looking at her work because it's pictures from a simpler time. Everything looks so normal and happy and things are where they belong. And like you say, the colors are beautiful. Okay, we're going to start on our lesson. Our title again is The Lasting Gift of Grandma Moses. Everyone knows about Kentucky Fried Chicken, founded by Colonel Sanders in his 60s, an age when most people retire. Now imagine someone who began work at the age of 78. Such is the case with a simple woman who belovedly became known as Grandma Moses.
Born in 1860 in New York, Anna Mary Robertson left school at age 12 to work in other people's homes to help support her family. She became Mrs. Moses in 1887 when she married Thomas Salmon Moses. After Thomas died in 1927, the 67-year-old widow kept herself occupied with needlework, but because of arthritis in her hands, she eventually turned to painting as it was easier to hold a brush.
Though she had never received any formal art training, the septuagenarian widow began painting scenes from her childhood memories. These centered on American rural life, a simple subject matter which she captured with luminous, lively colors. Her first paintings sold at a local drugstore for only $3 to $5 each, but she was discovered by an art collector in 1938, and soon after, her works were placed in various shows and exhibits. Described as American primitive style, her landscapes were soon fetching $8,000 to $10,000. By this time, she had been given the nickname Grandma Moses.
The elderly Grandma Moses even became quite the celebrity. President Harry Truman invited her to the White House and played the piano for her. Then, when she turned 100 in 1960, she graced the cover of Life magazine. She received accolades even after her death in 1961, with President Kennedy stating that all Americans mourn her passing. As for herself, Grandma Moses once said, "I knew nothing better and made the best out of what life offered, and life is what we make it. Always has been. Always will be." Grandma Moses left us not only with lasting art, but also words of wisdom.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to have that point of view. You have what you have, make the best of it.
Yeah, it's a little bit like playing cards. If you get a bad deal of cards, you get a bad hand of cards, well, you still have to play.
Deal with it.
Yeah, literally.
All right, so our title again, The Lasting Gift of Grandma Moses. Now, this was an older woman. I think that she didn't become widowed until she was 67 years old. Oh, that's pretty amazing for a marriage to last that long.
Absolutely. And at a time when almost everybody smoked and people ate maybe in not such a healthy way at times too. There was a lot of heavy fats in those diets. People just didn't really take care of themselves with the way they ate back in that time, her husband lived a pretty long time.
That's right. Okay, so the lasting gift of Grandma Moses. She did something when she was older, later in her life, and it has ended up being a great contribution to world culture. Now, specifically, Chris used the term Americana. So just take the word American and add an A to it, and you get the word Americana. That just means all kinds of representative, specifically American culture.
Yeah, when you think of what does U.S. art look like, and you imagine maybe these red barns and kind of American farm life, that would be what we would call Americana, that kind of pop culture art.
If you want to look it up, look for Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to start.
Okay.
With Grandma Moses.
That's right. Okay, so it's lasting because she painted these beautiful pictures, and now we have them. That is her gift to all people. Our first sentence, everyone knows about Kentucky Fried Chicken, founded by Colonel Sanders in his 60s, an age when most people retire.
Hold on, Karen. The word Colonel Sanders, it's Colonel. What did you say?
So you're expecting me to say colonel or what?
Oh, I don't know. It looks and sounds completely different. Why?
Can you remember a time when you were a kid and you figured that out for the first time?
That's actually how I learned to spell the word Wednesday. I had this thing when I was a kid. I used to say it wrong to spell it right.
Yep.
Yeah, and Colonel is, oh boy, you have to say it wrong. It doesn't look anything like it's spelled.
Yeah, and especially for people who mix up their R's and L's, they may feel vindicated now, like a Japanese who really has trouble with R's and L's. They'll say, see, you mix up your L's and R's too.
That Colonel, just to be clear, that was an Italian word. Excuse me, it was a Latin word, then Italian, then French, now English. No wonder it's a mess.
It's all mixed up. So never mind the details or the history. When you see this Colonel, say Colonel Sanders. It shouldn't be a problem because I think his brand name has a pretty wide world recognition. Yeah, okay. So everybody knows about Kentucky Fried Chicken. We're not here to do a commercial, but we're talking about something that everybody is familiar with. And you see that statue of the Colonel looking kind of elderly, and he's wearing that right suit and then this pin tie. You know that he didn't start his career in this area until he was in his 60s. And it says that's usually when most people are done with their life's work, they retire. But now this is working up to somebody who even outdid Colonel Sanders. Okay, our next sentence. Now imagine someone who began work at the age of 78.
Yeah, so 78 is definitely an age most people are not thinking of working. Talking about Colonel Sanders very briefly, he actually had restaurants for a long time, but when the American highway system was built, it went around his restaurant, and so he had to close his restaurant. He packed his stuff into a car and would drive around and say, hey, listen, I'll sell you my special chicken, and for every chicken you sell, give me 5 cents.
Oh.
And it was slow, but that's how his empire started, in the back of his car, and he was so secretive that he would order all his ingredients from many different companies and mix them himself so no one could ever learn his secret recipe to his finger-licking good chicken, as they say.
What was it, 18 secret herbs and spices?
Is it 11?
Or whatever it is. He actually admitted that they were not secret at all. He said you probably have them in your cupboard in your kitchen.
Yeah, I guess it's how you do it. Right?
Yeah, and then how you market it.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had this special mixture, and that really took off. I mean, you find it all over the world now. So that was a big deal that he started this big business so late in life. All right, so now imagine somebody who did not begin until 78, age 78. You know, we should be lucky enough to live that long. Some people don't live that long. Such is the case with a simple woman who belovedly became known as Grandma Moses.
So such is the case. We could also say that's what happened with this simple woman. She was well loved. When we say beloved, this is a really strong feeling that maybe you don't actually know this person. The example that actually came to mind when I saw the word beloved was like one of my first pets. Like my pet died a long time ago, but I absolutely hold those very strong, deep feelings for my cat Oliver. Beloved gives a very strong feeling to you.
Now, I have to admit that for me, it often has a religious connection because I went to a Christian school. This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. So I can recite a lot of Bible verses that I learned as a kid. And this is sort of like, it sounds like an earlier form of English. So I often think of the Bible when I see words like this.
Let's look at paragraph 2. Born in 1860 in New York, Anna Mary Robertson left school at age 12 to work in other people's homes to help support her family.
Okay, so she was born in 1860. That's right when the Civil War is starting.
You know, check this life out. So Anna Mary Robertson, Grandma Moses, lived to 101.
Right.
She was born when you could still own a slave. When she died, the first American flew into outer space just 6 months earlier.
Imagine that
span. Amazing life that is.
That's right. I use the word span, and span means the distance from one point to another, emphasizing, wow, it's really a long way to go from point A to point B. That was quite a lifespan.
And to be honest, she ended school at age 12, which sounds young, but for her time, for a girl to go to school to about the age of 12 in the 1870s was actually a pretty long time.
Right.
So mom and dad must have had some money to keep her going to school that long.
And they cared about the education of their daughters as well as sons.
She became Mrs. Moses in 1887 when she married Thomas Salmon Moses.
And that would put her at about 27 years old, which may have been a little bit late for that age. People tended to marry early.
After Thomas died in 1927, the 67-year-old widow kept herself occupied with needlework. But because of arthritis in her hands, she eventually turned to painting as it was easier to hold a brush.
That's interesting because Chris said that he kind of identifies with Grandma Moses and thinks of his mom for various reasons. I think that's true of me as well because for much of my mother's life, she did a lot of handiwork, a lot of needlework like Grandma Moses must have. And that was just something that women did. They've been doing for centuries in the West. They do crocheting and knitting and embroidery and things like that. So Grandma Moses did too. But when you get older, it gets hard because if you're doing embroidery, you have to sometimes sew things one thread at a time in the cloth. And that is very, very fine work. So your hands have to be very, very flexible. When you get arthritis and when you get old and your joints get stiff, you may have arthritis. It's very, very painful to bend your fingers. So she found that it was no longer working, that she was doing this needlework day after day. So that's something my mom did as well. And instead of doing needlework, she turned to painting. That means she decided to do something different. Instead of needlework, I'm going to paint because she can hold the brush and just move it in big strokes across the paper, and she doesn't have to bend and open her fingers as much. And this is also interesting to me because later in life, when my mother was already in a nursing home, she started painting. And her paintings were beautiful.
What a nice story.
Yeah, actually. And, watercolors are not that easy because with oil paintings, you can paint over your mistakes many times. With watercolors, you have to get it right the first time or it looks overworked and not pretty.
But interestingly, talking about the kinds of paints you use, Grandma Moses actually used house paints when she first started painting.
I didn't know that.
Well, think about it. You're 78. Oh, let's try painting. Do you want to buy a lot of art stuff? No, you just grab the paintbrush from the garage and the can of paint and you go at it.
She used house paint.
She used house paint at first. She
Wow.
bought proper paints later, but her earliest paintings were actually just house paint.
That's amazing. But
It's amazing.
If you have talent, it doesn't really matter what materials you use because the talent is going to come through. It's just like my father-in-law, who was a really good cook. He had a teeny tiny kitchen, but he made wonderful food.
Yeah, a great guitarist doesn't need an expensive guitar. It's in your talent. It's in your skills.
Willie Nelson's guitar has a big hole in it.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great example. Very quickly, let's look at the word widow. This is actually made up of two parts, and both of these words, the parts of these words are ancient. One part of widow means to be empty, And the bottom half of the word widow means you're poor. So a widow is a person whose husband has died. So now you're empty and poor. Boy, that tells you something about this word.
I didn't know that, and I'm going to look into that when I go home. And that's probably mostly what happened to women because they were so dependent on their husbands.
Absolutely. Remarry quickly if you can.
Next paragraph. Though she had never received any formal art training, the septuagenarian widow began painting scenes from her childhood memories. Now, some of you may feel a little scared off by that very long word, septuagenarian. But when you run into a word like this, sometimes the meaning is not so difficult. Look at the parts. And you can often tell from context probably what it is because we already know how old she is. She's 78 years old. And September, it comes from Latin, so that means she was in her 70s.
We see the SE like the word seven. We can also see the word generation on the inside there too. I will say you don't often see this word. You will see octogenarian more, and that octo is probably a little easier and immediate. It's someone that is in their 80s.
That's right. Okay, so she had never been to art school. And these days we sometimes think that if you are going to do something, you have to get formal training, you have to graduate, get a certificate, prove that you have gone through this course. But that didn't happen with her, and you'll find this is true of all kinds of artists. Lots of musicians are very proud of not being able to read music. So she figured out her own method and created beauty just by feel. She saw what worked, what looked beautiful, and that created her art. And often that is the most spontaneous kind of art.
Actually, looking at her needlework, if you wonder where the Grandma Moses style came from, it's not new. She actually had developed kind of her look and her portraits and her style in her needlework.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
because a lot of people, when they did needlework, they just followed patterns.
Well, she did in many ways. Like she would just go line by line and create a certain style. But when you look at a Grandma Moses painting and then her earlier needlework, you see there is a continuation there. This wasn't a wholly new invented style by her when she picked up a paintbrush.
Oh, that makes sense. So she'd already worked on her art for a lot of years before she actually started painting. I used the word spontaneous just now, and spontaneous is something you do right on the spur of the moment. Spur, S-P-U-R, spur of the moment just means right now. I didn't plan this. I didn't prepare. I'm just going to do whatever comes natural. That's spontaneous, and it's spelled S-P-O-N-T-A-N-E-O-U-S. S-P-O-N-T-A-N-E-O-U-S, spontaneous. Grandma Moses's art looks very spontaneous. Our next sentence, these centered on American rural life, a simple subject matter which she captured with luminous, lively colors. I really like this sentence. First of all, rural life, we think of the country because rural is the adjective for country. They don't sound alike because they come from different places. But rural just means living in the country, not the city. And then luminous means bright and shining. And lively means they're fun. They're not just kind of boring. There are a lot of different colors that look pretty together. I really like this sentence because it puts pretty pictures in my head.
I agree. I thought the word luminous was really attractive. And when you look at her paintings, you know that they're not bright or shiny, but you do understand, oh, yes, I know why you use this word because they're very eye-catching.
They're full of light.
Yeah. Grandma Moses lived in a time in American history when she was born, like 80% of Americans lived in the countryside. But by the time she died, many more Americans lived in cities than the countryside.
Okay. And to capture something, that means to represent it very accurately. So she was making paintings of country life in America, and she captured it. That means she caught it, and she expressed it clearly and accurately in her paintings. Next sentence, her first painting sold at a local drugstore for only $3 to $5 US each, but she was discovered by an art collector in 1938, and soon after, her works were placed in various shows and exhibits. Now, note the word drugstore. We don't have this quite so much now because we have big stores that sell all kinds of things, but they did not sell just medicines. They sold all kinds of daily necessities as well.
The closest thing we could get to that in Taiwan is kind of like Watson's or Cosmet, I'd say.
Right, that's right.
Louis Caldor is the guy that found her in 1938. And when he saw her work, he was in love with it right away. And he begged to know, who is this person? And he drove to her house. And when he arrived at Grandma Moses's house, she wasn't home. And so her daughter-in-law says, well, hold on. If you wait, Grandma Moses has 10 more paintings. And so Grandma Moses comes back and she's like, oh my God, you told him 10? And so she tore up her house to find these 10 paintings, but she could only find 9.
Oh.
So she was afraid that her daughter-in-law would be called a liar. So what did she do? She cut one of the paintings in half.
Oh, really? Yeah. And then she got her 10 paintings.
She had her 10 paintings.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, so at the beginning, she apparently didn't think that her paintings were anything special or had a lot of value. So $3 to $5 US, that's not modern money. That's probably $3 to $5 back then, which is more than now. But still, it's not a large amount. But later on, after this art collector had visited, he started saying, well, these paintings are worth a lot more.
Absolutely.
Okay, and our next sentence is, described as American primitive style, her landscapes were soon fetching $8,000 to $10,000 US.
248,000 NT to 310,000 NT.
For one painting.
That is, yeah. And Grandma Moses, actually, an interviewer asked her, so do you have any special feelings towards these paintings? And she said, no, I just want the money.
Is this a true story?
This is 100% true. It was on a CBS News Hour. You can see it on YouTube, actually.
Actually, at the beginning, you're kind of surprised that people like your stuff. But once you get used to it, you think, just hand over the money.
She was very matter-of-fact about it.
There's something really nice about that because you feel like they don't have hidden motives.
Absolutely.
All right, and our last sentence in this paragraph is, by this time, she had been given the nickname Grandma Moses. All right, next paragraph.
The elderly Grandma Moses even became quite the celebrity. So when we say this, quite the something, she's not like tier 1 superstar famous, but we do think she is pretty famous. So we might say someone is quite the singer. You're not Frank Sinatra, but you can go to a karaoke bar and make people clap.
Right. When you say quite the, it's different from quite a. Quite a celebrity is not so marked. There's nothing really special marked about that phrase. But when you say quite the celebrity, you're sort of saying, oh, this person is very cute and look how far they've come. But just like Chris said, you're not way at the top. And it sounds a little patronizing.
Yeah, you wouldn't say to Wu Yitian, oh, you guys are quite the band. Like, they're very famous.
Right. Okay, next sentence.
President Harry Truman invited her to the White House and played the piano for her.
I didn't know that Truman played the piano.
Then, when she turned 100 in 1960, she graced the cover of Life magazine.
To grace the cover of something means to appear on the cover, but it makes it sound like, wow, this is really special.
Grandma Moses painted more than 1,600 paintings, 25 of which she painted after the age of 100.
That's amazing. Okay, next sentence.
She received accolades even after her death in 1961, with President Kennedy stating that all Americans mourn her passing.
And I don't know if I remember her death, but I remember Grandma Moses still being alive. So I go back to that time. She was really widely loved and respected.
The word mourn means to sadly remember something.
Right. Very sad that she died. Next sentence.
As for herself, Grandma Moses once said, I knew nothing better and made the best out of what life offered. And life is what we make it. Always has been, always will be.
And that is really great folk wisdom that we should always keep in mind. Instead of saying, I wish I had this, I wish I had that, life is not fair, just take what you have and make the best of it. That means do the very best you can with what you have.
Grandma Moses left us not only with lasting art, but also words of wisdom. And lastly, let's look at our 4 questions here. Number 1, what is this passage mainly about?
The answer is C, a brief biography of an artist who started late in life.
2, why did the writer most likely choose Colonel Sanders to introduce this passage about Grandma Moses?
The answer is B, Sanders and Moses both started careers very late in life.
Number 3, which of the following events happened first in the life of Grandma Moses?
The answer is D, her husband passed away. And
Number 4, which of the following statements can be inferred from the passage?
The answer is A. Truman served as president of the United States before Kennedy did. And that's it for today.